I am standing in Lucky Records in Reykjavik. A young band is performing in the corner. They are talented. Shifting styles from dreamy post-rock to indie jams with a charismatic lead singer and plenty of onstage energy. In front of me is a rack of CDs labelled New Icelandic Music, and my eyes are widening as I take in the sheer depth and variation displayed. The show is my first taste of the Iceland Airwaves Festival, a 5-day explosion of mostly Icelandic music that takes over Reykjavik every November. Lucky Records is one of many off-venue bars, shops, hostels and museums, not to mention barbershops and swimming pools, that put on shows throughout the week, for free, alongside the main festival. This young band, called Vara, are one of 56 acts that will showcase at this venue alone, 48 of which are homegrown in Iceland. Over 170 Icelandic acts will perform over the coming week. How does a country of 300,000 people produce so many musicians of this diversity and quality? Throughout the festival, I find myself trying to unravel this question. My first hint came the following morning as I went in search of the Grunt venue, which I was surprised to discover was a hall at a retirement home, where I entered to find the residents going through some morning exercises. Once the group leader was done, he asked if anyone played guitar. Thinking that he might want some extra accompaniment for a sing-along, I obliged, only to find that he wanted me to perform. As tourists and local children filled the hall, I found myself being the first act on the first official day to perform at the Airwaves Festival. Once I'd sidled off stage, the first official performer came on stage. Svava Knute was heavily involved in Icelandic political protests this year, but here was playing a lighter set, coaxing the audience, young and old, Icelandic and foreign, to sing along with his own songs and some traditional Icelandic favourites. The main act of the show was Axel Flovent, one of Iceland's brightest new prospects, who later that evening would be performing on the main stage of the festival's focal point venue at Harper Arts Centre. But here was happy to be performing his hits to an audience that otherwise probably wouldn't get a chance to see him. It revealed much about the attitude of the festival and its performers. Of the increasingly homogenised festivals that are now saturating the British music scene and competing for banner names to attract audiences, how many are so wholehearted in opening up and engaging their local communities and harder to reach audience? Yet here, it's an arrangement that suits everyone. By bringing the people of Reykjavik on board, the community responds in kind, opening its doors of their businesses to put on free gigs and welcoming the army of tourists that invade the city. It gives the festival a unique identity that means even in the absence of Iceland's biggest names like Björk, Sigur Rós, Mammut and of Monsters and Men, as well as less than welcoming early winter Icelandic weather, the festival is sold out. It is also a sign of how much Iceland seems to put music and creativity at the heart of everyday life. Smaller community festivals abound throughout the year in all parts of the country. Brass bands, choirs and other community groups are widespread, and this is backed up by a substantial network of state-supported music schools, which supplement the compulsory music education students receive in school at rates that are affordable. Consequentially, Iceland reportedly has the highest percentage of culturally active citizens in Europe. I asked a number of people I met through the week why they felt this is the case, and got a mixture of responses. Most agreed that it begins with community, since much of Iceland's identity is bound up with storytelling, the sagas, and through that singing, so people traditionally connect these activities with their sense of identity, which in turn explains why music in particular is prioritised in the school curriculum. Another common response referred to the work ethic of Icelanders. Living with the country's harsh conditions, there is a sense that you have to offer more than just doing a job. One must also contribute to your community. A sensibility that is then continued even as the country is modernised and standard of living has grown. In terms of musicians, this means that the first stage is often playing for free and helping grassroots groups and festivals. For some of the younger generation, though, particularly those who have grown up in the urban environment of Reykjavik, this creative drive is more connected to a desire to have a good time, a sense of freedom and fearlessness, which has perhaps grown since the financial crash, as well as pride in the fact that Iceland is now so recognised for its cultural output. While this perhaps gives a sense for why there is such an abundance of musical activity, it doesn't actually explain the diversity and the quality of what's being produced. While the focus on arts and music in particular is strong in the schools, the actual curriculum is fairly similar to other European countries, with a relatively traditional emphasis on classical music, instruments and singing. It appears to be in the grassroots environment that Icelanders develop the knowledge and the skills in contemporary music that makes their culture unique. Day one at Airwaves focused heavily on homegrown talent, with all but 2 of the official festival performers hailing from Iceland, is perhaps a good illustration of this diversity. This year there is a strong focus on the hip-hop and rap scene here, which has exploded in the years following the Icelandic banking collapse in 2007, and is reflected in some of the imports that have been booked for this year's festival, like Skepta, JME, Horror and Sleaford Mods. The genre's embodiment in Iceland, through acts like Ulfa Ulfa, MC Gaudi and the Reykjavik Stjættir, borrows heavily from the British grime scene, but with an Icelandic spin of humour, politics, environmentalism, gender equality, sexual equality, and a slightly more punk aesthetic. It is a long way from the crypt music that raised the profile of Iceland on the international stage at the start of the millennium through bands like Sigur Rós, Björk and Moom, as well as Icelandic music's association with grand documentary soundtracks and childlike wonderment, was always a bit of a press oversimplification, dating back to the rise of Björk as an international star and darling of the weird and wonderful. The reality is very different. While there may be a tendency among many groups here to throw the reverb up to 11, it is far from universal, and it would be reductive to say it is down to a desire to reflect the glacial wilderness of the country. In fact, trying to pin down an Icelandic sound is virtually impossible. On a single day at the festival alone, I take in singer-songwriters, hipster folk, surf rock with a theremin, dark wave, electronica, punk and hip-hop. Far from exporting a unique style to the world, it seems that Icelandic musicians are all too keen to embrace the styles imported from elsewhere and give it their own twist. What helps make it original is that these genres aren't existing separately, as they often do in the UK and Europe. Instead, there is a cross-pollination at work, which is not only creating new sounds, try to define what the heck DJ Flugelungeskip style is, but also bringing Icelandic bands' success within those genres. At the heart of this interaction is the tendency of the musicians themselves to collaborate and have side projects together. A couple of years ago, the Icelandic incest prevention app caused a little stir internationally. Based on the national database of genealogy, it allowed people about to hook up to check they weren't unwittingly related, a potential occurrence given the island's small population and relatively low rate of migration. After a few days here, I began to ponder whether a musical equivalent might be needed, seeing how so many acts seem to share members. For example, cool electro R&B outfit Gangly feature Ulfa from Oyama, Jofrida from Samaris, and Sindri of Sinfang and Seabear. Connected band members from these groups would bring in the likes of Soleil, Kimono, Moo, Mr. Silla, Vessen. Well, you get the idea. The Kevin Bacon at the heart of this year's festival appears to be Hrafkell Gudjonsson, drummer of Agent Fresco, MCA Gauti and Ulfa Ulfa, who played a whopping 23 gigs at the festival. The result of this is that bands have members with experience in a range of genres, which means that they then bring that to each project, leading to a wonderful melting pot of ideas and consequentially innovation and experimentation. In part, this interconnectedness is a consequence of the small population effect I mentioned when talking about the West Cork music scene, an ease of networking tied to a demand for musicians, as well as a financial incentive to get involved in multiple projects. However, the Icelandic music scene seems to take this to a whole new level. Musicians frequently refer to each other like parents, siblings, sons and daughters, suggesting that established artists are actively involved in supporting other musicians. This also extends to promoters, labels, studios, managers and distributors, all who seem to share a similar attitude of collaboration, friendly competition and mutual promotion. There is a practical reason for this. Iceland's population simply cannot support a music industry of this size, and it therefore relies on exporting either by encouraging cultural tourism or by touring and selling music abroad. Recent figures estimate there are over 3 Icelandic bands on average playing somewhere abroad every day. As a result, it is in everyone's interest to keep up Iceland's reputation for innovation, new music and consistent quality. It reminds me somewhat of the collective bargaining approaches of the NFL and the Premier League, and Airwaves is therefore at the very heart of this, the biggest advert of brand Iceland. Again, how much could communities with similar populations to Iceland learn from this? The final ingredient that I felt I witnessed this week, the one that perhaps gives me more envious pain than any other, is fearlessness. The kind of fearlessness that makes someone put on a festival for 9,000 people with no names bigger than Hot Chip and John Grant. That makes pop powerhouse Milky Whale try and get a bunch of tourists having lunch in a cafe to jump and dance like they're in a club. That makes Dreamwife start playing a song that really needs the guitar part, even though the guitarist is in the middle of trying to replace a string. That makes the nation's premier classical composer form a techno group. And that, in the words of Benedict Hermanson, makes people go crazy and do stupid things that people in other places would look at and say, it's impossible. Most of these musicians are not earning much. Not even some of those who are hailed as heroes among the locals. Yet when I ask about their expectations for the future, most seem to shrug. They'll continue doing what they do regardless of if it's a hobby or a career. It seems such a contrast to young groups in the UK who feel gripped by a deadline for when they have to make it, and a sense that if they don't, then they'll be forced to give it up and get a real job. I've long argued that this fearlessness is the real benefit of strong arts education, community and a supportive social system. I'm not saying that Iceland is perfect. The day after the festival there is a protest against the failure to stop 2 suspected rapists leaving the country. Midway through the festival there was a call to arms from Björk to protect the country's wilderness from industrial development. And there is considerable debate about the identity and future of the country as its tourist industry expands and its economy has begun to liberalise again following the financial crash. However, whatever the future holds for this island, I feel they are better placed than most to face the challenges of the 21st century. And hey, whatever happens, they'll have a damn good soundtrack for it.